Good evening and welcome to SALT Conference 2021. It's super great to have you all here. I know we're in weird times where this would have been in person and it would have been super exciting, but here we are still being able to meet, and we just thank God for that. And I thank you everyone who registered and has been able to be a part of this conference. There's good things in store for you, so let's dive into that. So, some of you may not know, my name is Theo Chapeta, Theodora Chapeta, but nobody really calls me Theodora, so Theo Chapeta. And I work for Flood Church, Lilongwe. And one of the things that I've been tasked to do here at SALT Conference is talk about creating boundaries as we lead with empathy. So we're trying to lead with empathy, but within that, we're trying to create boundaries. Now, I'll tell you one thing about myself. One thing about me is I am an empath. So not only do I feel my feelings greatly, I tend to feel the feelings of other people even much greater, you know? So it's very easy for me to even just pick up on people's feelings even before they say anything to me. And then I end up taking those as my own sometimes, you know? So within the course of my life, I've had to actually even learn the hard way of how to then create boundaries for myself. So I'll let you in on a story. Back in 2019, I was working for an organization that does vocational training and counseling for single parents. And these were mostly single women out in the rural areas. So what I was doing was, not only was I managing a lot of the projects for this organization, I was also in charge of the counseling bit for these women that we were, training vocationally. So what would happen is I would wake up in the morning, go to the office, do all the admin work, and then later in the afternoon have to go to this to the project site and then have to counsel. At first it was one group, and then it turned into two groups. And then my bosses left for about 6 weeks. So within 6 weeks, I, in that organization, was the director of the organization, I was the procurement manager of the organization, I was the counsel of the organization, I was the HR of the organization, I was the accountant of the organization. Pretty much everything rested on my shoulders. And then guess what happened? Burnout. I ended up at a really bad spot where I just could not function, literally could not function. Getting up in the morning was rigged with so much anxiety. You know, everything I did I had so much anxiety within me. I was really depressed for a very long time because then it always felt like, oh no, I'm going to mess up. I'm going to, do lots of things to kind of just, the owners of this organization are going to come back and find it burnt to the ground. That was like one of my biggest fears during that time. And so what was happening was I would go to these project sites and it's time for counseling, and these women would tell me their stories, and really heartbreaking stories. And what would happen is after some time, because I feel greatly, I would feel all those feelings and then go home so drained. And then after some time, when this burnout started happening, I was introduced to a term called compassion fatigue. I'd never heard about it in my entire life. But I learned about it then, learned it the hard way as well. But I learned about it. And what compassion fatigue is that when people tell you their stories, they're really rough stories, you then become either numb to those stories or you become very doubtful about it. You're just like, they're trying to scam me, or I can't believe that they're saying that. They're probably just lying. And that's what started happening with me, I would become just very numb. And then me being very numb meant that as I'm counseling them, it wasn't necessarily going very well. That's exactly what happened. So then was the time somebody sat me down and said, Theo, you need to create boundaries. My mother sat me down as well and said, Theo, I need you to learn a place where you stop. And at first when I heard this of like, create boundaries, are you kidding me? I work with people, it almost felt like if I'm creating a boundary, the boundaries that we know is, houses here in Malawi, we have fences around, right? So, and those fences are usually to keep people out. We want to limit the amount of people that come in. And a lot of the times it feels like, because then it always feels like, oh no, you don't want to let us in. And that was the mentality I had in my mind of, then what's going to happen now? If I create boundaries around this thing, then how do I then go back to work and lead? How do I then go back to work and counsel these people? How do I move forward if I create boundaries? However, I have now learned in hindsight the right way in which you can create boundaries and how boundaries can actually be very beneficial. And I want us to dive into that. I will tell you right now, I'm no way an expert in the creating boundaries, but also I am learning just as you. So let's learn together as we look at what Jesus, the man himself, did with creating boundaries. It's weird to think Jesus created boundaries, but really, he did. He did create boundaries. So we're going to take a look at Mark chapter 14, verse 32 to 34. Then we'll see how, just a few things in how Jesus created boundaries and how we can then apply that to our own lives. So Mark 14, verse 32 to 34 says, they went to a place called Gethsemane, and Jesus said to his disciples, sit here while I pray. He took Peter, James, and John along with him, and he began to be deeply distressed and troubled. My soul is overwhelmed with sorrow to the point of death, he said to them. Stay here and keep watch. That's the word of the Lord. So, in looking at this passage, Jesus gives us, and I want us to talk about specifically two ways that Jesus shows us in how to keep our boundaries or in how to create healthy boundaries around ourselves, because there is a way to create unhealthy boundaries. But today we want us to create healthy boundaries around ourselves. Now, the first thing that Jesus did, so this is at this point in Jesus's life, he's almost at the point of going to the cross, right? This is the night that they're going to catch him and take him to the cross. So of course he knows he is fully God and fully man, so he knows what's about to happen. But also because he is man, he's feeling all of the sorrow, all of the deep, deep sorrow of, he's been doing all this great work, but here we are at the point where he's about to be crucified. And he knows at the deepest core of him how gruesome this is going to be. How they're going to beat him senselessly, how they're going to nail his literal flesh to a wooden tree, how they're going to do all of those things. And this hurts him, It gets him to a point where literally the Bible says he was deeply distressed and troubled. He said he was overwhelmed with sorrow to the point of death. And I think maybe some of us could relate to that. We've gone through things in life, or because our friends closest to us have gone through terrible things, we also get to the point where we're so distressed we think that distress is going to just take us into death, straight into death. So here, let's take a lesson from some of the things that Jesus did. Number one, in verse 32, he said, they went to a place called Gethsemane, and Jesus said to his disciples, sit here while I pray. That's the first thing. He said, sit here while I go and pray. First thing Jesus did was recognize the state that he was in. When they got to Gethsemane, he knew that I know what's about to happen. Therefore, I know what's going on within me. I know the sorrow that exists within me. I know the depressing thoughts that exist within me. I know the struggle and maybe even some anxiety that, is within me, because it's all within that sorrow of knowing I'm going to have to die. Even being God, he knew he was going to have to die. And to have to die is a really big thing. It's a big deal, and we all know that. And for him he recognized his own emotions at that time. Now, the first thing in creating boundaries is recognizing where you're at in life. There's a lot of times that we want to just continue to push through. We're feeling maybe a little bit depressed. We're feeling a little bit anxious. We're feeling all of these emotions that are overwhelming even. But instead of taking the time to sit down and recognize okay, right now, things are not well with me, we want to keep pushing through. We want to push through to the point where things are really getting difficult for us, where we won't be able to stand. But here's Jesus showing us hey, it's okay to recognize and acknowledge the feelings that you are feeling. He literally says, I am overwhelmed with sorrow. He acknowledged the feelings he has. And part of us creating boundaries, the first step is to acknowledge what's going on, acknowledge the state of life that we're at, And after he acknowledged the state of life he was at, he did the second thing. He confided in a few. We all know Jesus walked with 12 disciples. He chose 12 disciples. But even beyond that, he had a lot of people following him. However, during this time when he's had so much sorrow within him, what did he choose to do? He chose 3 people that he said, you are coming with me, right? He says in verse 33, it says, he took Peter, James, and John along with me. And he began to feel deeply distressed and troubled. And that's when he confided in them and said, hey, I am overwhelmed with sorrow to the point of death. He didn't tell the entire 12. He told only 3. It's showing us here that letting only a few people know what's going on in your life, what's truly, truly happening, is not you being fake, is not you being disingenuous. And I know this word fake is thrown around a lot, you know, when people don't know what's going on in your life. Oh, they're being fake, they're not being a real friend. But truth is, there's certain things that only certain people can handle in your life. The weight of the things that is going on, only a few people can carry that weight with you. And so it's up to you to, 1, recognize there's a weight I feel. And number 2, to know, hey, I'm not just going to go and broadcast to the world and say, I feel a big weight on my shoulders. No. You go on to a few people and you say, hey, I need y'all to carry this weight with me. And that's exactly what Jesus did. Only 3 people that he said these words to. I am filled with sorrow to the point of death. I'm overwhelmed with sorrow to the point of death. He only told 3, not the entire 12, not everybody who had followed him since he started his ministry. So in the same way, it's okay for us to only limit certain things to certain people. It's all right to know that at this point in my life, there's this that I can tell this person. There's that I can tell this person. And there's this that I can't not tell another person, you know. And I will give you an example of that from my own life. There was a time where I myself, actually, I'll tell you that at the beginning of this year, I got a mental health diagnosis of I have mild depression, you know, and anxiety. That's stuff I struggle with, and I'm actually on medication for that. But as I was going through the journey of now processing what's going on within my mind, I only literally had 4 people that I had to tell because I knew these people could carry me through. And I'll be honest with you, out of those 4 people, none of them were my family members. Not because I don't love them or don't think that they can, or don't trust them, but it's because I knew that their reactions would only make things worse for me. Therefore, what I did was limit the amount of people that knew what was going on with me at the time, until a time when everything was set. Then I knew I could move forward with this thing. So limiting the amount of people that know your story or hold your story is not you being fake or disingenuous. It's actually good for you. It is creating a boundary that helps you live healthy, because when you live healthy, you can then show empathy to others. Creating boundaries helps you guard your heart, because I'll give you this. Proverbs 4 verse 23 said, above all else, guard your heart, for out of it flows everything, is a wellspring out of it. And so for you, in order to be able to lead other people, to be able to go far with other people, you have to start first with guarding your own heart. That's where it begins. That compassion fatigue we're talking about starts in the heart. When your heart is now heavy and tired, that's when you begin to say, I'm just going to be numb to this. I'm going to be numb to the world. I'm going to be numb to the pain of the world. And that's not how you lead. When you're numb, you become abrasive. And being abrasive means you are just cutting people off left, right, and center. You're being very quick to speak, and you're hurting people in the process. But in order to lead with empathy means we're leading with compassion, we're leading with love, and that begins with self-examination. So I've talked of 2 things. First of all, you acknowledge your own feelings like Jesus did. Know what state of life you're in. Examine yourself in what state you're in. And number 2, confide in a few. You are very welcome to confide in a few. Don't feel the need to always tell everybody what's going on. You can confide in a few, and that will be actually good for you. So one of the things that I would love us to continue to think through and consider, number 1, what boundaries do you need to create for yourself today? What are the things that you need to hold with only a few people? And also, what things do you need to acknowledge about the state of life you're in? At what stage of life are you in? And what feelings do you need to acknowledge that will then help you know, okay, this I can confide to that particular person. Let's think through that as we then worship together. We're going to go into a time of worship. And so I'd love us to just worship together. And as we're worshiping, think through to your life and say, God, show me the spaces that I need to acknowledge the feelings that are within me, but also help me to see the people that can carry this weight with me. Help me, show me the spaces where I can create good boundaries within me. Let's worship together, and after that, we're going to go into our breakout session. Thank you so much.